Yeah, so kind of the topic I wanted to discuss today was monetary debasement and the effect that idea has on society at large, and how it has detrimental effects on society just outside of the more practical effects of what's obvious, right? Like goods are harder to come by and more expensive, but kind of on a deeper level, what it does to a society when you have that. And even right now, currently, we're in an environment where it's happening at an accelerating pace. So not only is it happening, but it's happening faster and faster as time goes on. And one of the things that you can't, whenever you're talking about that, you can't leave it out, is the fact that money generally for a lot of people in society is how they value themselves and how they value themselves in relationship to other people. And it's kind of the measuring stick that they use to define their worth, right? Because a lot of people, as a corollary of that, define their worth, based on their job or their occupation, what they do for a living. And that's tied very, very closely to the amount of money they earn, the salary they earn, which of course is denominated in fiat terms, which is subject to what we were just talking about. Um, so, you have this situation, I think, over time where people, if they value themselves by how much money that they are able to acquire through their jobs, if they are in an accelerated environment, you have a situation where people just in general don't know how to value anything, right? They because they're used to using it as a measuring stick to compare each other, right? But if it's affecting everybody simultaneously, it just the entire measuring stick breaks down, and people don't have a way to assess value. You know, for me personally, I noticed that as people, as the type of phenomena goes on, that people generally, they tend to become more short-sighted and less long-term minded. So they'll, instead of pursuing, tasks that projects that would take, multiple years, people sort of narrow their time horizons kind of, down to more short-term pursuits, all the way down, at the very end of that spectrum, it's just pure hedonistic pursuits, right? And just the pursuit of pleasure and nihilism,
Yeah,
essentially. And
yeah. I mean, uh, I guess the easy road to money is always very attractive for pretty much everyone, and it's very attractive to think that you can have what you desire, what you wish, and you can have it now, rather than wait like 6 months, 3 years, 5 years maybe. And yeah, I guess you're right. We are very short-minded because we never look forward more than, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, something like that. A few people, I think, they are very worried about getting, to the end of the month. So I mean, it's a situation where, on one side, I guess the point is right. People are short-minded and they don't really look over the long term. On the other side, you could factor in the problem that they are kind of brought to think that way, especially when maybe you've lost your job, or maybe you don't have money to provide for your family. The economical circumstances are changing, and even maybe the labor market it's kind of fucked up at the moment. There is some sort of a war in between poor and employees to get the job. So it's very difficult to relate in a few words because there are a lot of phenomena and factors at play here. But you know, as a general rule of thumb, I guess the point you were making about society, yeah, when you debase a currency which is used as a unit of account, and people measure their wealth, their status in those terms, basically you're changing that unit of account, so everything goes out the window because you can make more money in nominal term, but What a lot of people don't realize that until the point it's too late is that what is important about money is the purchasing power at the end of the day. I mean, you can make $1 million a year, but if 10 years from now you're gonna buy half the goods and services you used to buy with the same amount of money, it means that yeah, you made a lot of money on paper, but your purchasing power is gone down. So you're not actually richer, you're poorer if you think about that in those terms, right?
Yeah, I think though that people, they don't know that on a conscious level, right? Because inflation kind of feels good. It feels, during an inflationary period, people will earn more dollars, right? Their wages will inflate somewhat, and so there's like this weird, you know, I guess conflict between the numbers they see on the screen and the numbers ability to purchase things that they want. And so that's it's like a conflict between like their conscious brain and their subconscious brain. Um, but what you were saying is like, as far as, you know, seeing, different, these inflationary forces, is I've noticed it sort of breaks down some of the societal pacts or some of the norms that we have, and I've noticed that in the way that like boomers are not able to communicate with the younger generations as far as like life possibilities and potentials, right? Because you know they it's just they're using that measure of or that unit of account that they remember from years ago, right? And applying what they did under those circumstances to people who are using a different measuring stick, and it sort of
Yeah,
breaks down.
agreed.
Yeah, yeah. I
There
mean,
is a generational gap there. Yeah.
I remember talking to my mom, and she said that she's like, yeah, I just worked at a hot dog stand for the summer, and then saved up and paid for my college that year. It's like, okay, that's no longer a possibility for kids, but
Yeah, now you
um,
need a student loans, and you're going to repay that in how much time? I mean, years, 5 years,
yeah,
10 years, maybe. And I'm
yeah.
not I'm not I'm not an expert because I don't live in the U.S. So, but I'm asking you.
Oh, it's they'll pay it off. They'll be paying it off their whole life. I mean, I have a family friend
Jeez.
who's he's a plastic surgeon in one of the wealthiest zip codes in Florida. So kind of like the Hollywood of Florida, and he still has student loans. And he's like 45. Um,
Yeah. So I mean, when you
yeah,
talk about society falling apart, there is another component, because you think that everyone should have the same right, and the right to have an education should be granted constitutionally, right? But if you factor in this dynamic, you realize that in order for you to have an education, which it's not guaranteed that you're going to have relatively good job, right? Because the education is just the education. Then you have to work your ass off and go out there in the free market and getting the job you were dreaming about. So, starting out, it's not guaranteed. And then even if you do that, even if you get to the job of your dreams, you are still left with a debt to pay off, which are gonna stay with you for years. So is this justice? I mean, is this fair for society? I don't think it is.
yeah, man. Another thing on a fundamental level is that, going back to like what we were talking about as far as people using money as like a way to value each other and to compare themselves to one another. It if the government is the one who is able to produce that free capital with no risk, then you know uh, they have the ability. Well, first of all, the best business practice in that environment is to create a business that is able to tap into whatever that source of free risk-free capital that comes from quantitative easing. So all the most successful businesses pop up around that stream of capital, and it creates a society where Um, the government decides what is valuable, right? Because they decide where capital flows, and so you really don't have a free market because all these companies who want to be the best business strategy, right, to cozy up with that supply, they need to get on board with whatever the politicians want and implement what it. So they're just kind of an arm of the government at this point, and it's kind of a situation where if you think about like what money is on a fundamental level, right? It's people assigning value to certain things or certain ideas. But if it's like, what kind of world do we live in if the government is the person who is assigning that value, right? You know,
Yeah,
why did they determine what is good and what is not good, or what is important or not important?
yeah. I think there is. I mean, there is a lot to talk about in that speech alone because you know if you start to think about what is value, and as you said, people tend to believe that value is the number which is written on your banking account. But just to put out a provocative question, if you got $1 million in your bank account, and I have, let's say, a ranch, a home for the vacation, I have a decent amount of assets, and I'm talking about hard assets. I think, or even if I have, let's say, some sort of let's say a farm. So I'm able basically to provide for myself to put food on the table, not relying on the mall or the supermarket or the store, right? I mean, in the eventuality of a crisis like the one which is maybe starting now, it would be interesting to see where is the value.
Well, that's the thing is like that is the uh, that is the point in time where people should be afraid of, right? Because
Yeah,
that is a bad experience, and there's a lot of people who are they want to be Nostradamus. They want to predict when that will happen. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to, it may not happen for a while. But I think what's scarier than that is the idea, like if you look at it from a mathematical perspective, the idea that eventually that will happen, right?
yeah,
It's only a
yeah,
matter of
yeah.
time. And
I mean, you can say it will happen because it already happened in history, and
yeah,
maybe
well,
history doesn't really repeat, but it often rhymes. So
yeah, typically the way you see that play out, and it's happened in history before. So what generally happens, right? Like in normal times, well, not necessarily normal times, but before you cross the Rubicon, so to speak. Um, like what happened in March 2020, right? People still perceive fiat to be a store of value. So when March 2020 happened, people hoarded, uh, savings in their bank accounts and things like that, which makes sense. I mean, savings are the point of savings is, to have greater savings in times of uncertainty, so that you can use it, you know, so you have that capital and it gives you optionality in times of uncertainty. So it makes sense. But the point where you cross the Rubicon is where, um, you know, where either that doesn't happen, or I think we've already seen that in 2020 is when people hoard into that uncertainty, and the central government just prints into that, right? So while everybody's hoarding their money, the government's just rug pulling them. And I think
yeah.
that's kind of, we saw, like, people always talk about shitcoin rug pulls. The government rug pulled people during the 2020 March 2020. Uh,
I mean, it's again, it would take like 6 hours to discuss everything which would need to be discussed, but just to be short, right? Again, when people hoard towards money, fiat money, whatever it is, the dollar, the euro, or the yen, it's to some degrees because they perceive that you know that is value in those fiat money. But it's not only that. I mean, if you look at the charts, you can see there is a massive spike in the Dixie, right? And it's totally understandable because what you've just said. But it's not only people like me and you, consumers, citizens, right? It's the institutions, because if you think of how the entire system is built up, there is always demand for dollars, and when shit hits the fan, everyone will scramble to get dollars. Maybe not because they think there is absolute value in it, but if you look at it from, let's say, an institution or a bank, you got balance sheets to be in order and to be respected, and you have risk to be offset. So how do you offset risk? Well,
Yeah,
given how the financial system is built up, you need dollars, or at least treasuries, or something which is convertible into
yeah.
dollar, just because the dollar is the world reserve currency as for now.
Well, I think the system's really fucked if that ever changes, right? If people stop hoarding fiat in times of uncertainty, um, like what happens in an environment where nobody holds fiat? Period. Right. That's when you have a
Yeah,
system collapse.
like in the Weimar Republic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, basically, you
When
are dumping your fiat for whatever goods you can lay
right
your hands on.
when everybody just share when the most common opinion is that you spend it as fast as you can, and
Yeah,
that's the
because
most common
tomorrow is
belief.
gonna worth less than today. Yeah.
Yeah, when that happens, then yeah, that's kind of um, mark that on your calendar because that will be sort of the systemic collapse that everybody's been
Yeah,
predicting
because
forever. Yeah,
if you think about that, it's just because the entire system is built up on trust, which is essentially having faith in the fact that the government will be there for you when you need it. But at the end of the day, I think it's all based on a lie. Getting back to the point of currency debasement, right?
yeah, that's one of the worst things about it is that when the people need that protection most, it's not going to be there. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's
it's
like
not.
those. Sorry, that famous quote from I guess it was Mark Twain. He was saying that it's not what you don't know that screw you over, is what you think is sure, and it's just not like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a that'll be a weird time for sure. I don't even want to try to predict what it'll be like because
No, it's
yeah,
scary. It's scary just to think about that.
yeah. I would imagine it would be lead to a major war. I would assume, but then again, how do you finance a war without fiat currency? It's another question, right? So I don't know. I really don't know. It's a little bit of a
Yeah, I
mystery.
mean, it's what is really scary about that if it's that the point that to to defend status like being the world reserve currency with all the advantages that it takes, right? Those are real reasons why a state or a country can decide to go to war. I mean, it's not about defending a small country. It's not about humanitarian reasons or whatever. But I mean, now it just happens to be the U.S. in that position, and I know you are a U.S. citizen, so it's not like I'm talking against you or whatever. But it's just the fact. History now puts ourselves in this situation. So imagine the U.S. staying a threat of the US dollar not being the global reserve currency anymore. Those are reasons that can really push you to fight a war with everything you have. Because when you lose the status of a world reserve currency, your empire is done. There is a cycle. There is education, technology, production, and military forces. And the last one standing in a decline of an empire is the global reserve status. As for the currency.
Oh, guys,
Hey, what's
Hey
up, man?
Rob,
how you doing? Hey, man.